Sleep ship archive. Transmission initiated. Vessel status stable. All primary systems nominal. Cryosleep monitoring nominal. Archive integrity confirmed. Voyage year 214. Tonight's record comes from the archives of old Earth. The subject, the forest canopy, the structure that forms the upper surface of a forest, and what it did to everything below it. The canopy was not the forest as it was typically experienced. A person entering a forest moved at ground level, through undergrowth, around trunks, the eye traveling at most a few meters through a space that seemed open and navigable. That experience was real, but it was the floor of the system, what organized it, what produced the particular quality of light, the humidity, the temperature, the stillness, existed above it, mostly out of view, mostly unreachable. From the outside, the forest resolved into a surface, not trees, not individual trunks or crowns, a continuous undulating textured plane of living material, green in motion with wind unbroken across the landscape except where a river or clearing interrupted it. The individual trees that composed this surface were not distinguishable from above. The surface they had made together was. A canopy is not a collection of trees. It is a surface made of living things. What happened at that surface, and what it produced for everything below, was the record. You may rest now. The archive will do the work of the night. A person walking through a forest receives very little information about what the forest is. The view from ground level is trunks, undergrowth, the particular texture of the path, a horizontal experience organized by what is visible at eye level and below. Looking up produces a partial view, crowns, branches, patches of sky through gaps, the canopy seen in fragments. Nothing at ground level gives the whole. The canopy, seen from the floor, looks like a ceiling with holes in it. What it actually is, a continuous surface managing the exchange between the sky and the interior, is not available from that vantage. What reaches you has already been decided above you, not the floor where the roots anchor and the fallen matter accumulates, not the trunks, which are the structural columns lifting mass to height, the canopy, the continuous plane of leaves and branches at the upper surface of the forest, is where the light is intercepted, where the rain first arrives, where the wind is met and absorbed, where the temperature of the outside air encounters the resistance of the forest. Everything below the canopy exists in the interior. Everything above it is the outside. The ground level experience of a forest is the experience of the canopy's interior. The shade that makes a forest cool in summer is the canopy. The humidity that makes the air feel different from open air is the canopy. The particular filtered quality of forest light, green, diffuse, moving with the wind overhead, is the canopy. The relative stillness when the wind above is active is the canopy absorbing what arrives at its surface before it reaches the floor. Everything a person noticed about the quality of being in a forest, the way it felt different, enclosed, dim, was the product of a surface they could not see in its entirety from where they stood. The forest is stratified, not as a classification, as a reality. Descending through the vertical structure of a forest from the top, the character of the space changes continuously, each level defined by what the level above it passes through. At the very top, emergent trees extend above the main canopy, individuals that have grown through the continuous surface below and extend into open air. These trees exist in a different world from the rest of the forest. More wind, more direct sun, wider swings in temperature and humidity. No shelter from any direction. They are the tallest members of the system, and they are the most exposed. Below the emergent trees, the canopy layer itself. This is where the forest's leaves are concentrated. the dense, interlocking surface where sunlight is intercepted and converted. It is the energetic engine. What is not converted passes through, already reduced. Below the canopy, the understory. What grows in the understory cannot survive in full sun. It was adapted to what the canopy passes through. The filtered version, not the original. Expose it to the light that exists above the surface and the leaves bleach and die. It was built for what arrives, not for what exists above. Below the understory, the forest floor. The floor receives a very small fraction of what arrived at the canopy. The floor is dim and stable, inhabited by organisms that do not require light, living on what has fallen from above. The floor is the endpoint of a long process of filtration that began at the top of the canopy and produced, by the time it reached the ground, a set of conditions unlike those anywhere else in the system. The forest exists in layers, but the canopy decides what reaches below. At the top of the canopy, light arrives in full. The canopy sits in abundance. Light is not scarce at the canopy's surface. What happens to that light is the forest's central organizing event. Each leaf absorbs what it can use and reflects the rest. The reflected portion is what the eye registers as green. The canopy is not one leaf. It is layer upon overlapping layer, each positioned to intercept what the layer above it did not. By the time light has passed through the full depth, it has been substantially reduced. Light does not reach the forest floor directly. It is negotiated. What passes through to the understory is the portion the canopy did not use. Scattered light. Light that found gaps and passed through without contacting a surface. Light the canopy reflected rather than absorbed. By the time it reaches the floor, this light is already different from what arrived above. Lower in intensity, shifted toward green, scattered into diffusion from all directions rather than arriving from one source. The quality of forest light, the particular greenish dimness that identifies it immediately, is the record of what the canopy has done with what arrived at its surface. Light arrives as abundance. It reaches the ground as scarcity. The floor is dim. The leaf shapes of plants in the understory, broad and thin, oriented to catch whatever arrives, are a record of this. The growth strategies, slow, conservative, are a record. The timing, calibrated to brief windows when a gap brightens the floor, is a record. The understory does not simply grow in dim conditions. It grows in this specific dim, shaped by this specific surface above it. Your eyes, standing at the floor, are adjusted to what was allowed through, not to what arrived at the top. The canopy is not fixed. Wind arrives at the canopy surface and moves across it. Individual branches flex, leaf clusters shift and reorient. The surface as a whole undulates, waves passing across it in the wind the way waves pass across any surface with mass and resistance. From above, a forest in wind behaves like something fluid. The individual trees invisible beneath the surface itself expressing the wind as a continuous medium would, the motion sweeping across it in long, slow rolls. From below, this reads differently. The light at the floor is not steady. As the canopy moves, the gaps in the canopy move. A shaft of more direct light appears on the floor, traverses it slowly, and closes as the canopy shifts back. These moving shafts are brief windows of intensity, moments when the alignment of a gap with a floor position allows something closer to direct light to arrive, not direct. The gap lets through the light that passed through the canopy layers at that position, which is still filtered, but more intense than the surrounding diffuse illumination. They appear, traverse, disappear. They appear again. These windows move without stopping. The canopy is always in some degree of motion. Wind is almost always present at the canopy level, even when the air at the floor is still. The canopy absorbs the wind before it reaches the ground, so the floor can be calm while the surface above it moves continuously. The movement above produces continuous change in the light below. The floor is never exactly as it was a moment before. Gaps are a different kind of resource from light. A gap is a wound in the surface, a branch broken, a crown thinned, a tree that has died but not yet fallen, the canopy opened at that point to whatever lies below. At a gap, the light below intensifies sharply. The dim diffusion of the interior is supplemented by something more direct, more intense, different in quality. Plants below the gap respond, orienting toward the new intensity, redirecting growth, accelerating consumption of stored reserves in the attempt to exploit the window before it closes. The gap may be temporary, closed in months or years as surrounding crowns grow inward, or persistent as a fallen tree opens the surface for a longer period. The forest floor is always slightly behind the canopy. The light at the floor is what the canopy allowed a moment ago. The canopy has already shifted. The light is the trace of motion that happened above, arriving below with the delay and the reduction that the distance and the filtering require. The floor is always reading the canopy's past. Rain does not fall through the forest. It is processed. Water arriving at the top of the canopy meets the canopy's surface. Leaves, branches, bark, the accumulated biological material of the upper forest. A leaf is not a neutral surface for water. It has texture, surface tension properties, curvature, the particular waxiness or roughness of its species, all of which determine how water behaves on contact. Some water is held on leaf surfaces, beating against the surface tension suspended from leaf tips in drops that form slowly before falling as individual drops, rather than as continuous flow. Some water runs along branches to the trunk, follows the bark downward toward the roots. Some water evaporates from the canopy surface without ever reaching the ground. The rain that does reach the floor arrives transformed. Where rain falling on bare ground arrives as impact, driving into the soil, dislodging particles, running off rapidly toward lower ground. Rain that has been through the canopy arrives as drip from branch ends and leaf tips, continuing to fall from the stored supply of the canopy surface for hours after the rain above has stopped. It arrives at reduced force, spread over time, delivered more slowly and more gently to the soil. The forest floor does not experience the storm the way the open land outside the forest experiences the same storm. It experiences a slower, softer, more extended version. The canopy creates a different atmosphere below it. Temperature inside the forest is moderated relative to the outside. Cooler in summer because the canopy shades the ground, and the evaporation of water from leaf surfaces cools the air. Warmer in winter because the canopy traps the heat that radiates from the ground. The extremes that occur outside the forest, the heat of summer afternoons, the sharp cold of clear winter nights, are reduced inside it. The air moves less because the canopy absorbs the wind. The humidity is higher because the canopy traps the moisture that the soil and the plants release, allowing it to accumulate rather than dispersing into the open air above. Nothing arrives unchanged. The forest produces its own climate inside itself, not independently of the outside. In continuous relationship with it, the outside conditions arriving at the canopy and being processed into what the interior receives. A dry day outside the forest is a less dry day inside. A cold night outside is a less cold night inside. A heavy rain outside is a slow, moderated, extended delivery inside. The canopy absorbs variation and passes through a more stable version of what arrives. The interior is always a processed version of the exterior. The canopy is old, not the individual trees. Individual trees live and die on timescales that are long for animals, but brief for forests. What is old is the surface, the arrangement, the continuous energy intercepting layer that exists at the top of the forest has existed there through the lifetimes of countless individual trees, each of them growing up into the surface, becoming part of it, dying and falling out of it, being replaced. When a large tree dies and falls, it leaves a gap. Light reaches the floor at the gap's location at intensities not seen there, perhaps for a century. Plants respond within days, orienting toward the new light, accelerating growth, spending reserves they could not usefully spend before. Seeds germinate that could not germinate in the dim conditions of the closed canopy. Young trees race upward toward the opening. Over decades, the gap closes. The surrounding canopy grows inward, or a young tree established during the open period reaches the canopy level and joins the surface. The gap seals. The canopy is continuous again. But the canopy that closes the gap is not the same canopy that existed before it opened. Different trees have grown into that position. The species composition may have shifted. The individuals are certainly different. The gap is healed but encoded in the age distribution of the trees around it, in the understory species that established during the open period, in the slightly different texture of the canopy at that location. The canopy outlives the trees that make it. The surface persists while what makes it is replaced. The trees that compose it now are not the trees that composed it a century ago. They will not be the trees that compose it a century from now. The canopy is continuous. The individuals are not. Nothing above you belongs to this moment. What moves beneath the canopy has always moved beneath something older than itself. The surface does not notice. The canopy is indifferent in the way that very old things are indifferent. Not hostile, not aware, simply larger than the time scale on which the things beneath it operate. The structure continues without the individuals. Standing at the floor of a forest and looking upward, the trunks visible from below are the most recent generation of a surface that began before any of them germinated. The light falling through the gap above was determined long before this particular tree stood here. The canopy remembers. What moves beneath it does not. Nothing below the canopy grows freely. Understory plants are not smaller versions of canopy trees that have not yet reached the surface. They are adapted to filtered conditions, their leaf shapes, growth rates, and timing all calibrated to the world the canopy produces below. Many cannot tolerate full direct sun. Expose them to the light that exists above the canopy and the leaves bleach and die, the system overwhelmed by an intensity it was never built for. What grows underneath is determined by what is allowed through. Some understory organisms wait. Certain plants accumulate resources slowly in the dim conditions, building root systems, storing what the filtered light allows them to store, maintaining themselves at minimum expenditure. When a gap opens in the canopy above, the stored resources are spent. Growth accelerates sharply. Other species respond at the same time. Competition for position in the gap is immediate and complete. Many species pursuing the same intensified light, the fastest and most aggressive gaining height, the others being suppressed as the gap begins to close. Nothing grows freely. It grows when allowed. The permission is structural. The canopy simply exists, and the conditions it creates are the permission it grants or withholds without knowing it. The canopy is the gatekeeper. The canopy does not know it is a gate. No tree decided to be the canopy. The crown of a tree in a forest leans toward the nearest opening in the light above it. The shape of a tree's growth is the record of every gap it has found over decades. each branch the trace of an available direction, each lean the consequence of a neighbor's shade. Each tree grows toward light, not strategy, the consequence of how photosynthesis works at the level of cells. Cells that receive more light produce more growth. Cells that are shaded grow slower. A tree surrounded by competitors grows in the direction that provides the most return on its photosynthesis. And in a forest, that direction is upward toward the light the neighboring trees have not yet reached. The tree is not navigating toward the canopy. The tree is pursuing light, and the canopy is where the light is. The canopy is the result of many trees pursuing light simultaneously. No individual tree holds a view of the canopy as a whole surface. No individual tree is aware that it is part of a surface, or that the surface it is part of produces conditions for everything below it. Each tree is responding to its own local conditions. The light reaching its own crown, the shade cast by its neighbors, the space available in the directions it can grow, and the aggregate of all those local responses across all the trees of the forest, across all the years of their growth, is the surface. The canopy is emergent. It was not built. It arose. No one designed it. It is the shape that results from the application of simple local rules across many individuals over long time. The rules are simple. Grow toward light, compete for space, extend where extension is possible. The shape that results is a continuous upper surface, stable in its overall properties across a wide range of conditions, maintained without anyone intending to maintain it, replaced without anyone intending to replace it. No component of the canopy can see the canopy. Each tree in the canopy is adjacent to other trees, experiencing the competition for space and light at its own location, aware of its immediate neighbors, unaware of the surface it is part of. The surface is the view from outside and above. The trees are inside, experiencing only the local conditions of their position within something they cannot perceive as a whole. The canopy is visible only to something outside it. From within, there is only the immediate, the particular, the local, and the indirect evidence of the whole arriving as the conditions the whole produces. Attend to the quality of light that reaches below, not direct light, diffuse light. The light that has been through the canopy arrives below already changed, dimmer, scattered into arriving from multiple directions at once rather than from the single direction of the sun. The result is illumination without hard shadows. A branch does not cast a sharp dark line below it because the branch is not blocking a single source. It is reducing the contribution of one part of the diffuse sky while the rest continues to reach through from other angles. Shadow under a canopy is not absence of light. It is reduction of diffuse light. Moving light crosses this illumination. Wind moves the canopy above, and the dim light below shifts in response. Not the sharp, fast shadows of objects in direct sun. Slow, complex, continuous shifts in the diffuse illumination, the entire floor in gentle motion, the moving patterns, the trace of activity in the surface above. The wind is in the canopy. The floor receives the consequence. The sound in a forest is different from sound in open air. A forest absorbs sound differently than a field does. The leaves and branches of the canopy scatter sound waves. Sounds generated at the floor travel upward, reach the canopy, and are scattered and absorbed rather than reflected back down. There are no echoes. Close sounds seem softened, without the hard return that would characterize a reflective ceiling. The canopy is present overhead, acoustically. Its presence registered in what it does to the sound that reaches it, but it absorbs rather than returns. The air at the floor is the air the canopy maintains, cooler than outside when outside is warm, more humid when outside is dry, stiller when the wind above is active. Your body inside a forest is in a microclimate. The canopy's microclimate, produced by the canopy's activity, maintained continuously as long as the canopy continues to exist. The air against your skin is not outside air. It is outside air that has been through the canopy. Its temperature moderated, its moisture content elevated, its movement reduced by the mass of leaves that absorbed it before it arrived. The stillness at the floor is not the absence of activity. The activity is above. The wind is in the canopy. The photosynthesis is in the canopy. The moisture exchange is in the canopy. The floor is the interior, the managed space, the filtered and moderated result of what the surface above produces. The body under the canopy is the body in the interior of something larger, experiencing what the surface allows through. The hull of this vessel is doing something the canopy did, not with light, with the void. The void outside the hull is not comparable to the sky above the canopy. The sky was a source, light, rain, wind, arriving from above, processed by the canopy into what existed below. The void outside the hull is absence of atmosphere, of pressure, of temperature, of any of the conditions the biology requires. The hull does not process the void into something usable. The hull holds the void out. The canopy produced the conditions of the forest interior. A specific temperature, a specific humidity, the filtered and moderated light of the space below the surface, without the things living below it participating in that production. The forest interior was a consequence. The canopy was the cause. The ship's systems produced the conditions of the inhabited spaces. The temperature inside the cryogenic chambers is not the temperature of the void outside the hull. It is the temperature the ship's heating systems maintain at the biology's requirement. The pressure is not zero. It is the pressure the hull holds and the atmospheric systems sustain. The air has been manufactured, its composition managed, its humidity regulated, its circulation maintained. The light follows a cycle. Not the continuous dark of interstellar space, but a managed rhythm the biology was built to expect. Every condition the colonists rest inside is a condition the ship produces. The forest floor did not make its dim light, its stable humidity, its moderated temperature. Those conditions were the product of the surface above. What reaches them is what the ship permits. The body has never received unmediated light. On old Earth, sunlight reached the surface only after passing through the atmosphere, absorbed and scattered by the column of gas that separated the body from space. The light that arrived at the body's surface was not the light that existed above the atmosphere. It was the atmospheric remainder, lower in intensity, stripped of certain wavelengths that the atmosphere absorbed, diffused from its original parallel rays into something that arrived from a broader portion of the sky. The sun, as experienced from the ground, was not the sun as it was above the atmosphere. It was the sun as the atmosphere had processed it. The body was built for this version. The eye's sensitivity, its ability to function across a wide range of conditions without damage, all of it shaped by exposure to the filtered output, not the original. The unfiltered sun above the atmosphere would damage the unprotected eye in moments. The filtered sun, the sun as the atmosphere had made it available, was what the eye was for. The skin's relationship to light, its mechanisms for managing exposure, all calibrated to the version that arrived after passage through kilometers of air. Inside a forest, the filtering was double. The same atmospheric column above, and then the canopy. The light that reached a person standing under the canopy had been through the atmosphere and through the canopy. Twice processed, twice reduced, twice changed in character. The particular quality of forest light, the greenish diffusion, the way it arrived from every direction at once, the absence of hard shadows, the way it moved continuously without ever arriving sharply, was the output of this double filtering. The world's illumination, as two successive systems had prepared it for the floor. The body at the floor of the forest was at the bottom of two nested filters. Atmosphere, then canopy, each passing through a reduced and modified version of what had arrived at its surface, the body receiving the final output. Calibrated to it, adapted to it, unable to tolerate the original version of either the atmospheric unfiltered or the canopy unfiltered light. Resting at the interior of a nested system it had never been outside of. Your body has never received the original. It has always received what was allowed through. Your body is calibrated for filtered conditions. The biology of the eye, the skin's responses to light, the circadian system's calibration to cycles of illumination. All of it shaped by conditions that are always mediated, always the product of systems between the source and the receiver. There is no version of the body adapted to unmediated space. The body has never been in unmediated space. It has always been at the interior of something that managed the outside world into something survivable before it arrived. Inside the cryogenic chamber, the filtering continues. The light the body rests under is not sunlight. It is a manufactured approximation produced by the lighting systems, cycled on a schedule maintained for the biology's benefit. Not the atmospheric filtered sun, not the canopy filtered atmospheric filtered sun. The ship filtered version, more controlled than either, less variable than either, maintained by systems that do not sleep and do not drift. The body receives what the ship allows it to receive, as it received on old Earth, what the atmosphere and the forest had allowed it to receive. The filtering has never stopped. The body has always been in the interior of systems that stood between it and the source. The outside world, whether the full output of the sun or the void of interstellar space, was never what the body directly encountered. The body has always encountered the managed interior of whatever contained it. The ship is the most deliberate of those systems, the most complete, the most controlled. It manages more thoroughly than any natural system did, because what it holds against is more absolute than any natural system faced. The body rests in the most managed interior of its history. What reaches it is what the ship permits. That is what has always been true. From inside the canopy, you cannot see the canopy. A person walking under the trees can see individual leaves, branches, the underside of the crowns, patches of sky through gaps. The fragments of the canopy are visible, particular leaves, the way one branch crosses another, the texture of the light coming through at this or that location. What is not visible is the surface, the shape of the canopy as a whole, the undulating continuous plane seen from above, the way it resolves individual trees into a collective form, readable only from outside and above, is not available from within it. You are always looking at a part of something you cannot see as a whole. This is not a failure of position that a better vantage might correct. It is the structural consequence of being inside a system. From inside, the system presents its interior surfaces, the immediate surroundings, the local conditions it maintains at your location. The system's extent, its relationship to what lies outside it, its shape as a whole, these require a position outside the system to perceive. From inside, you see the interior. The system is not visible as a system. The atmosphere of old Earth was this. From the ground, the sky was simply the sky, blue in daylight, dark at night, weather moving through it, the sun traversing it. The thing that produced this. The column of gas, kilometers thick, held by gravity, managing the planet's conditions, producing the weather, absorbing the solar output before it reached the surface, was not perceivable as a structure from within it. It was perceivable as the conditions you were inside. The conditions, not the structure producing them. The hull of this vessel is not visible as a whole from within it. The interior surfaces are visible at each location. The material of the corridor, the curve of the chamber wall, the composition of the sleeping compartment. What is not visible is the hull as an enclosing structure, its total extent, the outer surface facing the void, the geometry of the hole that holds the atmosphere against the pressure difference at every point simultaneously. The colonists live inside a structure they cannot perceive in its entirety, moving through an interior whose exterior they cannot reach, experiencing the conditions the structure produces without being able to step outside and see what contains them. The system that organizes the experience is the one that cannot be experienced directly. Always inside the canopy, looking upward at fragments of it. Always inside the atmosphere, looking through it without perceiving its extent. Always inside the hull, surrounded by its interior surface without access to its exterior. The condition is persistent. The whole is always just outside the vantage. The organizing structure is always the one that remains invisible. Return now to the body at rest, the surfaces the body touches, the material of the cryogenic chamber, the temperature of the contact, the particular quality of what the body rests against. These surfaces are held at their conditions by the systems that manage the chamber, not by the body, by the layer outside. The air around the body, its temperature, its pressure, its composition, is the atmosphere the ship produces and maintains inside the inhabited spaces, not the void outside the hull, not the conditions of any world. The atmosphere the ship holds inside the containment of the hull for the duration of the voyage, the chamber inside the hull inside interstellar space, nested containers, each held by the one outside it, each producing and maintaining the conditions for the next smaller system to exist. The cell inside the tissue inside the body inside the chamber inside the ship inside the void, each boundary maintained by material sufficient to hold the difference across it, each interior produced by what contains it. The body has always rested at the center of this. The nesting on old Earth was different in composition, atmosphere rather than hull, forest canopy rather than cryogenic systems, the open sky rather than the void, but structurally identical, something outside, filtering and moderating. Something inside, experiencing the filtered and moderated conditions. The body at the center, calibrated for those conditions, dependent on the filtering continuing. The canopy did not stop filtering for the duration of a forest's existence. The atmosphere did not stop filtering for the duration of the body's time on old Earth. The ship's systems have not stopped filtering for the duration of this voyage. The body rests. The layers hold. The archive record for Forest Canopy is now complete for this transmission. The canopy was not what a person saw when they entered a forest. What they saw was the floor, the ground level of a system whose dominant structure existed high above, continuous and mostly invisible from within. The canopy was the surface. It managed what reached the interior. Everything at the floor was the consequence of what the surface produced. A canopy is not a collection of trees. It is a surface made of living things. What reached the forest floor had already been through the canopy, reduced, scattered, changed by passage through the surface. The organisms at the floor were calibrated to that version, not to the abundance at the top. Everything below was shaped by what the surface passed through. Light does not reach the forest floor directly. It is negotiated. The canopy negotiated the light. The atmosphere negotiated the light before the canopy encountered it. The ship's systems negotiate the conditions now. Light, pressure, temperature, atmosphere, mediating between the void outside and the biology inside. The body has always been at the receiving end of this negotiation, always at the interior of the filtering, always living in what the systems above and around it produced. What grows underneath is determined by what is allowed through. The body is at the bottom of the filtering. It has always been at the bottom of the filtering. The systems hold, the conditions are maintained, the body can rest. Voyage continues. Sleep ship archive. Transmission complete. Vessel status stable. Cryosleep monitoring nominal. All systems nominal. Archive records sealed and filed. Voyage continues. The light, the canopy, the filtered ground. You never received any of it directly. Something above was always deciding. Please continue restorative sleep.